Are we really in a bubble, or is the crash inevitable? We've done previous videos while we think that the housing market is doomed. Matthew's obviously been on the channel talking about that with me. I've got a few thoughts, but we always want to kind of look at both sides of the coin here, and that's what we're going to do today. And obviously everyone's asking, is there anything to be optimistic about with the housing market right now? And ultimately, could this real estate boom not turn into a bubble? Welcome to the VIP Financial Education YouTube channel, where we help you go further, faster financially. I'm your host, Michael Matthey. Those are some of the things we're going to talk about today. We're going to dive into a specific Forbes article that we found very intriguing during our research that kind of paints a little bit of a different picture. And if you like videos on real estate, please go ahead and drop that like below. That helps out our algorithms and will help us get more information out to folks like you. Over the past couple years, a lot of economists, a lot of people that are professionals in the real estate, particularly in the investing world, have talked about that pending downturn that was coming soon. On average, real estate corrections happen about every 10 years. So we're long overdue, in my humble opinion. I think the pandemic obviously kind of stalled that out. Some government assistance obviously has delayed that. People lost their jobs, small businesses closed. A lot of people took advantage of the forbearance just so they could stay in their home. And rightfully so, of course. Obviously, even renters, not necessarily even homeowners, were affected by it. Renters, lost jobs also. They lost businesses. They lost wages. Of course, the government stepped in with their moratoriums, so that helped them as well. And of course, these eviction moratoriums, although great for the renters, obviously had a strain on the landlords. They were not getting their monthly payments that, in most cases, that is their livelihood. That's why a lot of folks get those buy and hold situations so that they can have that monthly cash flow, which we talk about here a lot on the channel. But unfortunately, as we all know, these band-aids will not last forever. You add the ending of the moratoriums to a housing market that looks like many as a bubble that will ultimately crash, that's a recipe for absolute disaster. And of course, we've talked about that on previous videos. This is how a lot of the experts are really looking at that, but not everyone sees it that way. So we're going to dive into a recent Forbes article that really just sees things quite differently. And with this article, we're going to take a look at the 3 reasons why he thinks that this is certainly not a bubble. And this is from author Raul Elizalde at Forbes. Raul says, according to every available measure, median home sales in the U.S. are at a record high, and they showed little signs of cooling off. And of course, he's not wrong. I mean, you can take a look at home prices. It doesn't matter where you're watching from right now. They are through the roof. And of course, as an investor that, I took some lumps during the 2008 recession like a lot of folks did. Of course, there's trepidation. Of course, I've really got my eyes wide open, and a lot of investors that were burnt back then are starting to kind of try and read these tea leaves and kind of anticipate that so they don't get caught with their pants down again. And according to Raul's article, the housing market right now is radically different than it was back in 2008, and he feels it's to be a lot more sustainable and healthier than it was back then. And after reading this article, I kind of agree with them. Guys, I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to read. I'm always trying to enrich myself, with additional knowledge. So I know enough to know that I don't know everything. And this Forbes article really caught my attention. And here's a few reasons why. Number one is we're not seeing the credit boom that we saw back then. Banks have had a lot more stringent lending guidelines put on them, particularly with, Fannie and Freddie, that did not exist back in '08, which has led to the lowest ratio of real estate loans to total loans for commercial lenders since the 1980s. That's a very staggering statistic, not one that I was aware of. Leading up to the 2008 crash, that number was around 35%. Now sitting around 22%, so obviously not quite cut in half, but significantly lower. So now let's talk about what this means. What do those numbers mean? So often speculating as an investor can create these bubbles, but right now what really these numbers show is that it's simply a spike in the need for residential housing. Suggests that the driver in today's bull market in residential housing is not due to speculation. Data instead suggests that this is caused by an imbalance between supply and demand, which leads us to number 2 of Raul's article, which is a huge shortage of homes. Obviously, builders took a huge hit back in 2008. Because of that, the starts for private residential housing took a huge dive. New construction of privately owned homes has only just recently really made a comeback. In addition to that, the number of new households really tanked, which it often does after a recession. The scarcity of new housing units fell well behind the creation of new households, resulting in a supply deficit being carried since the financial crisis. And obviously the spike in demand, we can never ignore the pandemic right now. The spike in demand starting in 2020 with lockdowns in place, job losses in place. A lot of people were really forced to kind of consolidate households. You know, folks moving back in with families, for example, people taking on roommates, for example. Those are certainly a byproduct of financial hard times caused by the pandemic. And there were actually fewer households in 2020 than there were in 2019. That's a very telling statistic. And it's so telling and so odd that in fact it's the first time that year over year that has ever happened. Another condition setting the stage for a sharp rebound in the number of households this year was the growth in the savings rate. Thanks to stimulus packages and really depressed spending during the pandemic, the savings rate actually is at an all-time high. And now Americans are taking those savings and trying to jump back into home ownership. Demand is through the roof and homes are going for much higher than asking price, which makes Raul's third point why the boom is not a bubble quite unexpected. And that reason is homes are more affordable than ever. Sounds kind of counterintuitive with what we're seeing in the market right now, but there's actually a lot of validity to this. In his article, he writes, homes are at their most affordable in more than a generation. Mortgage payments for the median U.S. home have not been this low as a percentage of household income since at least 1984, when the series for household income began, and probably for several decades before that. Mortgage payments as a percentage of household income certainly paint a different picture than what we're used to seeing in headlines like no immediate relief from skyrocketing home prices. Raul goes on to write, mortgage rates or home prices would have to roughly double for this percentage to climb from less than 1/4 of household income as it is today to about 1/3 where it was a decade before the pandemic. Moreover, this is based on the full median price of a U.S. home, considering that mortgages typically cover 70% of the purchase price. The affordability of monthly payments may be even higher, at least before taking into account the down payment required up front. From this, Raul concludes that despite the noticeable escalation of real estate prices and the drought in the home inventory that realtors report everywhere, there seems to be no signs of a real estate bubble. With homes affordable and scarce, it would appear that prices may have considerably more upside before they can be considered expensive. The backlog in housing starts could take years to resolve, especially if construction activity slows down in response to higher costs for building materials earlier this year. You know, we talked about that in an earlier video and everyone's heard about it on the news right now with lumber prices having gone through the roof. There's finally starting to be a little bit of a slowdown with that. The market's starting to come back down as these quote-unquote lumber hoarders are starting to unload some of their inventory. But certainly the effects for those high prices could be felt for some time. I really think Raul does a good job of bringing up points that, you know, don't paint us in that bubble about to burst, but I think he's got some really good points for that. But obviously there's counterpoints to that, you know, this bubble is going to burst and it's imminent. For one thing, the pandemic devastated many, not only from a health or loss of life perspective, but also from an economic and personal financial stability standpoint. Now, the economic toll from this, you know, it's really tough to measure right now, but we've got some really telling stats. According to a report from Facebook and the Small Business Roundtable, 22% of small businesses closed in February of 2021. And Yelp data shows that 60% of all businesses that have closed permanently, unfortunately. According to the Mortgage Bankers Association, it showed that 2 million homeowners were in forbearance as recently as last May. Roughly half of those plans are set to expire later on this year, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has proposed a rule banning mortgage servicers to stop foreclosures at least until 2022. Now, although this may delay the potential negativity for millions of these homeowners, you know, it's kind of in essence kicking the can down the road. At some point, the buck is going to have to stop. Now, time will tell how this negatively or positively affects the housing market. We're certainly going to keep an eye on it for you. I like this article from Raul. It's a little bit different than my kind of initial thought process that I've shared on the channel here before, but it's always wise to get differing opinions. You know, you can kind of go down your own rabbit hole and ultimately just get really short-sighted, and having those blinders on, you might not see those things obviously in the peripheral. It's better just to be informed, you know, read up from folks that maybe have differing opinions, you know, talk to people that don't necessarily see things your way. That's what we did on this article today. That's why we thought it was important to share with you. So drop comments below. Tell me what you guys think about this article. If you like information like this, go ahead and drop that thumbs up below, guys. That really helps out our algorithms. If you're not a subscriber already, we would appreciate that. We always love having new folks here on the channel. And be sure and hit that bell notification that's going to alert you every time we have new content out there like this on the VIP Financial Education YouTube channel that's going to help you you go further, faster financially. Until next time, make it a great day and take care. Thank you.